I return to deer camp. And that becomes a theme for me throughout my whole life. And what I mean by that is I remember that first time at deer camp, even though like when I got drunk that first time, I didn't have like the picture perfect upbringing, right? There was
Mhm.
trauma, there was sexual assault, there was abuse growing up. And I remembered when I got drunk that first time, it it allowed me to forget about all the crap I was worrying about. And
Yes.
even if it was just for a couple hours.
Are you walking through a storm that feels like it will never end? Do you wonder if life's storms have stolen the beauty from your life for good? You're in the right place. My name is Heather, and like you, I've been through a storm or two and wondered if life would ever be beautiful again. Here we share warriors' words, stories of discovering beauty after battles, and the worth in your wounds. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words. Welcome, warriors. Jonathan M. Seidl, Jon, has written over 10,000 posts in his lifetime. First, after helping start a successful news website, and then as the editor-in-chief of the popular nonprofit I Am Second. He writes and speaks all across the country on the power of storytelling, radical vulnerability, faith, mental health, and addiction. He is the author of the upcoming book, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, a radically vulnerable story of being the Christian who became an alcoholic, his climb out of addiction, and how others can break free from all life's entanglements. And he'll graduate with his seminary degree in December of 2025. Before we hear from Jon, have you heard about the nonprofit I'm starting? As of this recording, I am trying to get some donations for the startup costs, and hopefully soon, prayerfully soon, we will be up and running. Please check out kofi.com/warriorwords for all the details. And that's KO-FI. That link, as always, will be in the show notes. Now, grab a tissue and join Jon and me as he shares about being a Christian who found himself in the throes of alcohol addiction and how crawling back to Jesus helped him find freedom. Let's rock. Welcome, everybody. We are blessed to have Jon Seidl with us today. And Jon, it is a pleasure to have you on the Warrior Words podcast today.
Well, thank you so much for having me here, Heather. I'm actually really excited for the last question about sharing warrior words because literally the epilogue of my book is warrior words. I mean, it's not titled that, but it's basically warrior words. So I'm excited.
All right. Well, I am looking forward to that. But let's start with stories because you and I both are storytellers, and that's kind of the basis of this podcast is starting with stories. And now I will be honest, I did get to read a portion of the book in advance. The book is coming out, no, not September, October 7th.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about the book itself and the title and everything as we go along. But one of the people that you quoted in the book was Saint Augustine.
Hmm.
And I have this the Augustine Institute's app on my phone. It's called the Amen app, and I use it daily for prayer and lots of different things. But I had this God incident. I no longer believe in coincidences. I had
Right.
this God incident this morning where the Augustine Institute sent an email, and the subject line, I'm going to read it because I don't want to get it wrong. What if holiness is found in the ordinary? And that reminded me of one of the opening ideas of your book about how when we tell our stories, the ones that are the ordinary are the most relatable,
Yeah.
and they seem to have the most impact. And so I read through a lot of your stories, and basically, what I would like you to do is to share with us kind of your story starting at deer camp
Hmm.
and then ending with the waters of the ocean.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say, I think that really is neat. And whether, tomato, tomato, Augustine,
Yes.
I tend to do Augustine. I don't know. I think it's probably just because my professor in college at one point said Augustine, right? Um,
Yes.
but yeah, it's really interesting. That point you're talking about, it's in the preface of the book of, I'm sitting at this conference and this guy says, listen, we build up so many of these people who, build an orphanage in Africa, and we talk about them and we applaud them, and we should. And
Hmm.
yet we don't have enough stories of ordinary people who have slogged through, who have come out the other side,
Yes.
like Augustine, right? I mean, he's a
Yeah.
saint now, right?
Right.
But man, I would be lying if the title of my book is not, kind of a wink at him.
Yes.
You
Yes, it
know, my
is. Go
my
ahead,
book is,
share it. Yeah, share it.
yeah, the title of my book is Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. And obviously Augustine's, I mean, along with City of God, but his most famous work is the Confessions, right?
Yes.
Where he
Mhm.
details how depraved he was, right?
Yes.
I actually just recently reread his book over the last few months, and it was just such an encouragement. So, all that to say, I love that. I love that little wink, and yes, that my story is. I mean, it really is the story of someone who, just like so many people, has struggled. And now maybe there's people listening who would say, well, I'm not an alcoholic or I don't have an addiction. And I think, what you'll find in reading the book is I'm pretty adamant that we're all addicted to something.
Something.
And,
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
so maybe your addiction isn't alcohol, but maybe it's your phone, maybe it's your kids, maybe it's your spouse, maybe it's food, maybe, as John Calvin said, our hearts are idol factories, right? And so we're constantly making, and I'm sure Augustine had a great quote about that similarly, right?
Mm.
So that's the heart of the book is like this normal story of someone who has struggled, and it does start in a sense at deer camp when I'm in my kind of late preteen, early preteen years or early teenage years where I'm from a small town in rural town in Wisconsin. And, I joke that there's only, three things that get you through those long winters. And that's the Green Bay Packers, hunting and drinking. And the deer camp story involves two of those, the drinking and the hunting. And um, I get my first deer, I shoot my first deer, and it's kind of like this rite of passage. And later that night, they're me and the guy that was my mentor was a great guy.
Mm.
He lets me have a glass of wine, and I mean, it's just so interesting, right? Like immediately I start sneaking it. And I had growing up in Wisconsin, and I get into a little bit about this in the book, but the culture is a drinking culture, right? And so that's a curse, but it can be a blessing, right? In that there is a demystification a little bit that happens, right? Like we've all had our first beer by the time we're 13, you know what I mean? And so it wasn't odd for, someone who was your caretaker or guardian to allow you to have a drink. So he allows me to have a drink of a glass of wine to celebrate, and I just immediately start sneaking it that night. And by the end of the night, I'm vomiting all over the place. And even though, for some people they get drunk for the first time, they have that first drink, and it just starts their slide immediately.
Hmm.
That wasn't the case for me, and I really didn't drink after that. I mean, I drank a little bit, but I never got drunk after that until I was 21. And for maybe some people, you're resonating with that, right? Like maybe your addiction or whatever it wasn't something that immediately started happening. And so that's my story. And so, but 21 comes along and I start realizing, hey, I need to lighten up. I need to live a little. I was a really good student. I was like a 4.0 student in college, and that wasn't because I was just this naturally brilliant person. It was actually I had a lot of anxiety, and at the time it was undiagnosed clinical anxiety and OCD.
Mhm.
And I talk about in my first book that there's actually some benefits to that. And one of the benefits is I'm going to get good grades at all costs, right?
Yes.
And so I'm going to push myself. I'm going to force myself. I'm going to worry, worry, worry. I'm going to worry. I worried myself into a 4.0. I didn't stumble into it. Wasn't just naturally gifted. I worried myself into a 4.0. And so 21 comes along. I'm a junior in college. I'm living out. I'm going to college in New York City. I'm living in Brooklyn with like 6 other guys, and I decide to lighten up. And what I realized during a really stressful time when we're living out in Brooklyn, when we're literally dodging bullets in this really rough part of the borough, um, and there's a lot of stress, and I'm engaged, but it's a long distance relationship. I return to deer camp. And that becomes a theme for me throughout my whole life. And what I mean by that is I realize, I remember that first time at deer camp, even though like when I got drunk that first time, I didn't have like the picture perfect upbringing, right? There was
Mhm.
trauma, there was sexual assault, there was abuse growing up. And I remembered when I got drunk that first time, it it allowed me to forget about all the crap I was worrying about. And
Yes.
even if it was just for a couple hours. And so, someone asked me once, they're like, so John, like you became an alcoholic because you were drinking away like these traumas and all these experiences and stuff. And I said, well, I mean, sometimes, right? You certain
Right. Yeah.
anniversaries, certain things trigger it, and you're like, yeah, I don't want to feel that. But really, you
Right.
you you create these patterns of escapism. And what I tell people is like my ultimate addiction was to escapism. That's the white whale of addictions, as Laura Love Hardin says in her book, The Many Lives of Mama Love. And I chased that white whale of addiction. I chased escapism. And I learned those habits of escapism starting at 6 years old. And at 6 years old, it's Tonka toys, Tonka trucks, and Barney. But then at
Right.
36, 26, 21, you realize, well, tequila and bourbon does the job a lot better, and a lot quicker and a
Yes.
lot easier.
Yes. Yes.
And so that, I start returning to deer camp during these times in my life where the stress and the worry and the escapism becomes a big pull. And even though I would say, and so that, well, I should say, that's why I would say that my relationship with alcohol was always misordered. And for me, and what I go through pains to talk about in the book is that anything that is misordered is disordered.
Right. Mhm.
It doesn't just like disorder just doesn't look at quantity. That's a factor in how much in what's going on. How much you're drinking is a factor in whether you are treating something in a misordered or disordered way. But it's
Right.
not the only factor. And I think for a long time I didn't really get that. And I think there's still a lot of people that don't get that.
Mhm.
And so they
Yeah.
say, well, I'm not drinking, X amount every night, or I'm not drinking X amount every week, or I'm not drinking X amount every month. I'm good. Right.
Right. And that's
And
the only
and
criteria.
that's the
Right.
only criteria they're using. Again, a criteria, yes. But even literally in 2013, and you read this in the book, they changed how they
Mhm.
diagnose, they changed how they treat, they changed the name, in fact, of alcoholism, because it's now on a spectrum, right? And so throughout my life, I had this misordered relationship with alcohol where I treated it as my means of escape. And I went through these periods, these up and downs where I drink more, where I pull back, where I drink more, I pull back. And I knew, and in those moments where I drink more, like I knew like I wasn't treating it well, but
Hmm.
then I'd pull back and I'd say, well, obviously I'm good, right?
Right.
Because an
Yeah.
alcoholic or someone with a problem, a real problem, in scare quotes, can't pull back like I did, you know? And so I went I went through life like that. And then, and I would say there were these healthy parts of me and these hurt, wounded parts of me, right? And so, I tell people like the healthy parts of me didn't need the alcohol, right? And so
Right.
when life was going well and it was and good, and I wrote this book in 2021 that did really well. Like the healthy parts of me were clicking and everything was good.
Yeah.
And I had even learned, my first book is on faith and mental health and being someone diagnosed with clinical anxiety and OCD. And I learned coping mechanisms and healthy coping. Like everything was good. I even wrote in my first book, I know that I need to watch how much I drink, right? But then 2021 happens. The book comes out, inevitably, and you've been on launch teams, Heather, so I know you kind of get this even more so than other people. But as an author, you can have these expectations and hopes for a book, and they're good and healthy and
Mhm.
right. But then, the book comes out, and like inevitably, it there's things that you want it to do that it can never do, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so, you're like, yeah, I was number one on Amazon in all these categories, and I was top 100 books on all of Amazon for everything. But I didn't make the New York Times best-selling list, you know?
Mhm.
I got this review, right? I was on this TV show. I was flown out to be with this person, but this person said no, and this TV show said no, and I wasn't on Good Morning America or the Today Show, and 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 I wasn't prepared for that. Like I wasn't prepared for the disappointment that I would feel, the disappointment despite the success, which sounds weird and but it's true.
I do think I'm going to interrupt you for a second there because I do think a lot of us do that.
Mm,
It's so much easier to focus on the negatives than
yeah.
we can explain away the positives. Oh, it was a fluke, or oh, it was my best friend's mother's son who wrote
Yeah.
that raving review, so
Right.
it doesn't count. Um, and I think we rationalize those good things away because the bad ones seem so much stronger. And that actually was a theme with my drinking for a while. When I did quit in the beginning, yeah, I remembered the horrible things.
Right.
But then as time went on, it's like, well, there was that one time and that was good.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I didn't really have a problem.
Mm, mm.
And our brains can rationalize so
Oh
much of
my
that stuff
goodness.
away.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a whole chapter of like, how does this happen? Right. And one of the big ways that this happens is because of what's called cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is exactly what you said, right? You can know something to be true and not believe it. You can want to do something and not do it, right? It's Romans 7, it's Paul.
Yes, that
And
was
so
one of the
that,
things I pulled out was Paul's statement. Yeah, I do
yeah.
the things I hate. Well, why?
Yes, exactly. And cognitive dissonance is a huge part of it. And it's just that's the fancy term for, when I interviewed Dr. Alison Cook on my own podcast, Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic, same name. And she talked about, the classic example is the person who was fighting climate change, but has a $70 million jet that flies, to get somewhere that's 30 minutes away. Right.
Right,
And you're like,
right.
cognitive dissonance, right? And we laugh at that one as like that's blatant, right? But yet we
Mhm.
all have those type of things in our life, right? And so
Right.
to be the best-selling author who knows I know I shouldn't be getting drunk, right? And who
Mhm.
knows I shouldn't be treating alcohol this way, but yet I do it, right? And that's where I think Paul comes in. But
Mhm.
that categorized, my life starting in what I call the severe slide period, from fall of 2021 to 2023. And over the course, just everything just seemingly just was like stacking against me. Had my own business. I lost my biggest client. I lost my second biggest client. And then my son was diagnosed with a bone tumor in his shin. And, we found out it was benign, but that whole process was hard.
Yeah.
And you're just like, what? All that, you go to the pediatrician, they say he's fine, and then by the next week you're meeting with an oncologist, and you're like, whoa, 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 what happened to he's fine?
Exactly.
And in all of those times, I just returned to deer camp. It's like, I don't want to sit with this crap, like
Right.
it's so much easier to just have a few bourbons. It really is. And that's true. It is. It is easier,
It
right?
is. Yes.
And we all numb to a certain extent, right? It's just like, are we going to numb? Are we going to cope healthily or unhealthily? And it just happens to be that the unhealthy stuff is the easier stuff, right?
It
The
is,
chips, the
yes.
food, the drinking, the scrolling, the tea, like all of it. The
Yeah.
unhealthy stuff is the easiest stuff. And my unhealthy thing was the bourbon and, the high alcohol beers. And pretty soon 2 at night turned into 3, and that turned into 4, and that turns into 6
Yeah.
and 10. And then you lose count, and drinking at, 7 after the kids go to bed starts to be drinking at, well, let me just lay the foundation and the groundwork, at 5, so that I'm in a better spot at 7. And then, like you said, you can justify anything. Well, I'm calmer. I'm less anxious. So parenting is tough. Let me be a better dad. I'm literally doing my kids a favor by having a couple before I tuck them in, because tucking is hard, and it's just, you start all these justifications. And then, so I just keep drinking more and more and more and more and more. And by the spring of 2023, I mean, I'm a full blown alcoholic. I mean, I'm hiding it. I'm on a first name basis with the managers at the liquor store. It's like, just all the quote unquote classic stuff. And yet I will say, not all of the classic stuff. And that's part of what kept me in bondage, is like, I can look back now and say, oh my gosh, I'm hiding beer cans. I'm hiding, I'm filling up bottles to make it look like I haven't drank it, like all that stuff. But I'm not emptying out my bank account. We're still paying our mortgage. We still have money for, all the stuff we need money for. I'm not, getting DUIs. Didn't say I wasn't driving drunk, but I'm not getting DUIs, right? I'm not living under a bridge. Obviously, I'm good. And so my wife and I go on an anniversary trip to Miami. Our anniversary is right around Memorial Day, so we always kind of have like a built-in 3-day weekend to celebrate our anniversary. And we always pick somewhere, and we plan it like a year in advance. And so we had picked Miami, and I had never been. We get a hotel right on South Beach, and there's one night where my wife is more of an introvert. And so, we had done we're going to go out to these great restaurants and we're going to walk along the boardwalk and all this stuff. And then one night she's like, I am just so tired. Like, can we just stay in and I'll read? And she's like, you can do whatever you want. And I'm like, here's the thing. I was never a party drinker. I was never like a life of the party guy. I'm gregarious, but it's not like I'm like, I need to go out and be with people and drink, right? Like, my thing was, I always drank to shut down. I always drank to relax. I drank to put my mind at ease, to not have to think about all the crap of the day that was mounting on me, right? So I was an alone drinker. So wife wants to go in, and I'm like, this is awesome. So I said, no, babe, I'm not going to. She's like, you can do whatever you want. I'm like, I'm just going to go down to the hotel bar. There's an NBA playoff game. There's an NHL playoff game. I'm going to set up my computer. I'm going to watch the game here. I'm going to have a couple appetizers. I'll have a couple beers, and this is perfect. And she looks at me as I'm leaving the hotel room, and she says, okay, but don't get drunk. Because by this time, even though I was quote unquote hiding it, And I was, to a certain extent, it was seeping through, you know.
Yeah.
And she knew. She was starting to really know. And I looked at her and I said, I'm not going to get drunk. And I can tell you, Heather, I had every intention of not getting drunk. Like I would have passed a lie detector. And I go down to the hotel bar. I have, I order an appetizer. I have the first drink. And I can't tell you how many I had after that. Because by 1 a.m, I am plastered, whatever word you want to use. And I realize, holy crap, I can't go back upstairs. I promised my wife I was not going to get drunk. If I stumble into bed, and I'm like, the room is spinning, like,
Right.
this is not good. And so, despite what people say, food does not make you sober. Time is the only thing that can make you sober. And so I realized I need to just take some time. And so I stumble my way down to South Beach in Miami because I'm like, I'm just going to sit on the beach and wait until I can, form
Yeah.
sentences again. And I get down there, and I don't know if anyone's ever been down to South Beach, Miami at like 1 a.m, but it is way busier than you would imagine. And, there's people and doing all sorts of things. And I'm like, pretty quickly, I have to go to the bathroom. I'm like, I can't make it back to the hotel. I can't just go in the bushes over here. There's people. And I think, the world's biggest toilet is right in front of me. And so drunk John stumbles into the ocean up to like my chest, my neck in the water. And I start going to the bathroom. And it starts coming out of both ends. And I have this moment where I look up at the boardwalk and I'm like, what has your life become? You truly set out not to get drunk tonight. And this is what happened. And in general, John, when you set out not to get drunk, this is what happens. And it was in that moment that after, what I call my severe slide of like a year and a half, the Holy Spirit finally broke through. And yet I wake up the next day. My wife asks, did you get drunk last night? And just so quickly and so easily, I say no. And 2 other times throughout the day, she asked me, did you get drunk last night? I say no. And I call it my Peter moment, denied it 3 times.
Yes.
And by that night, I mean, my conscience is just going crazy. The Holy Spirit is just working on me. And so at dinner that night, I'd go to my wife. I said, hey, I need to tell you something. I did get drunk last night. And she pretty quickly, breaks down. And she's like, I don't think you know what that does to a woman. She's like, I knew it, but to know that you lied so quickly and so easily, like, what else are you lying about?
Exactly. Yes.
And ironically, I pay the bill, dinner. I don't think I ate a thing. I feel like if I would have ate like a piece of calamari, it would have been, back in the ocean, pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And ironically, we just kind of start walking and we end up down by the beach close to where I was the night before. And I'm making all the promises. I mean, I'm like, I'm never going to drink again. I know I have a problem. I need help. I just can't, once I start, I can't stop. I need to get this, under control. And she looks at me and she says, John, I don't care if you ever drink again. Like, that's not my goal. My goal is not that you would, never have another drink. She said, because unless you get to the bottom of why you're drinking the way you are, it's just going to be something else.
Wise
and I'm
woman.
like, yeah, right. And I'm like, she's like, you've had traumas growing up. You've had unresolved issues that you've just never worked through. And you have to get to the root. And I'm like, can we just go back to the part where I don't drink? Like that would be easier. You know what I
Yes.
mean?
Hmm.
I would rather make you the promise and fulfill it of not drinking than having to dig through that crap. But that was I was like, okay, all right. Like promising not to drink isn't going to do it. So I guess I'm going to promise you to get to the root. Literally pulled up my phone and filled out an inquiry form for a Christian trauma therapist on the beach that night and sent it. And then when we got back to the Dallas area where we live, I just dug in. I dug in a good way, into all of the crap that those unhealed parts of myself. See, like I said, I'd let Jesus into a lot of parts of myself and turned those parts over to him. And he took up residence in those areas. But man, I had those like secret bedrooms that I was like, nope, can't go in here. Right.
Right.
And he wanted all of it. He wanted all of it. And once I finally turned all of it over to him over the course of that next year, it was hard. It was not easy, but I can tell you my life has changed drastically and dramatically. There was kind of 4 steps that he walked me through in order to find that healing. And I can say that today, life since then is better. It is best. It is not easy. It is not easiest, but I can say fully and completely that this life of, it's interesting. I'll say this life of sobriety, but I want to qualify that in a second. This life of sobriety is the best life I could ever imagine, but it's really the life with Jesus. Because I tell people, I don't want you to be sober. I'm like, what? You know, people talk to me about having a problem with drinking. Like, how do I get sober? And I'm like, well, I don't really want you to be sober. And they're like, well, I want a refund, you know? And I'm like, here's the deal. I said, I was fine. You know, I had those kind of stop and start periods, but I always came back to alcohol. I always returned to deer camp, right? How was I able to finally get sober in the end? I wrote an article about this and I said, I was finally able to stop drinking when I stopped trying to stop drinking. And it was when I finally shot for Jesus. You know, C.S. Lewis, favorite author, named my son after him. He's got this line in Mere Christianity where he says, you know, shoot for heaven and you get the earth thrown in. And he repeats that concept a couple places throughout the book. You know, at one place he says, you know, if you shoot for comfort, you won't get it. But if you shoot for truth, you may get comfort. And so that's what I came to realize. I had to shoot for Jesus. If you shoot for Jesus, you will get sobriety thrown in. Some people are like, well, you were the Christian alcoholic. What do you mean? And I was like, yeah, because I wasn't fully shooting for Jesus in all those areas of my life, in all those places of my life that needed him, right? I had walled those off. But once I opened those up to Jesus and shot for him, then I got sobriety thrown in. And now the life that I have with Jesus includes sobriety, and then it's the life that's worth living. Right. And you know, I go across the country speaking about this and, you know, a lot of times people will bus AA groups and 12-step groups into hear me talk. And I say, how many of you know a sober, miserable person, like a miserable, sober person? And so many people put their hand up and I'm like, guess what? According to the world, they're killing it. Right. They're not drinking. Yeah. And so, you know, everyone's going to, and listen, I'm not saying that's not a good thing. Right. If you are, especially if you're drinking and your place on that spectrum is like you've got visible withdrawal symptoms when you stop drinking for a day. Like I'm not out here saying don't go to a detox facility, don't go to AA, don't get sober. What I'm saying is don't stop there. Right. Right. And because the world, you know, you get sober and like that's where they stop. Right. For me, it was like, that's where the fun began. You know what I mean? Like, that's where life truly began at getting sober. Life didn't it's not ending there. And so then when I got sober, like then you know, and I was able to stay that way. Right. And so the world says you're miserable, but you're sober. Like, great. You know? And I'm like, no, I want more for you. I
Yes.
want more for you, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so that's, in the end, you talk about Confessions of a Christian Alcoholic. I say it's part memoir, part guide. And so you get a lot more details of the story. But then you also get a lot more details of like what it looks like. What does it look like to shoot for Jesus and get sobriety thrown in? And the steps that I took to get there. And like I said, we're all addicted to something. So I think everyone can kind of get something out of it.
Yes. And I agree. And that's one of the things that I like about sharing the more ordinary, relatable stories is because you don't have to have a deer camp moment, or you
Hmm.
don't have to have a South Beach
Yes.
moment to be an alcoholic, or as you have redefined in the book, and I'll let people read that.
Yeah.
But that's not the definition anymore. And you don't have to have the same exact story, but you can have the same experiences and the same needs and the same what's the word I'm looking for now? Deficiencies is not really the right word, but those holes in you that Jesus does fill. Um,
Those
and
unhealed, wounded parts of you. That's how I
yes,
talk about
yes.
them in the book. Yeah.
Yes, and I like how you described that too, about how you let Jesus in a little bit,
Hmm.
but you didn't let him in all the way.
Yeah. And
And
that's sanctification, by the way.
yes, and I like that distinction that you made in the book as well, that you point out about salvation, and that's important. But like you just mentioned with stopping drinking, you can't stop there. You
Hmm.
have the sanctification is important. It's allowing Jesus into those locked rooms.
Yeah. And sometimes what I've found is I think I've opened all the doors and I've unlocked them, and I have. And then, my goodness, would you not believe there is a secret passageway behind that one bookcase? There, I didn't realize, but the subfloor is rotten. And so what looks like to me like is fine. I bring the contractor in and he's like, "No, there's some rotten stuff on there." I'm like, "Oh, darn it. I thought I'd let you into everything." And I
Yes.
think here's the thing, as along this side of glory, like I think there's always going to be home improvements. Like there's
Yes.
always going to be improvements that we can make in the home. And yeah, now I would say that some of those issues that I was encountering and did finally give over to Jesus were part of like major foundation issues. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Hmm.
And now I feel like we're doing a little bit more of the updating and remodeling instead of the foundation work. But
Right.
maybe,
Yeah.
but I'm not putting it past him. Like he may find a cracked foundation in the garage.
You never,
Um,
yeah. Yeah.
but that's
Yeah.
that's I think that and that's not. And you've been in this world, Heather. Like it's not always a popular thing to say, right?
No.
There's a
Mm-mm.
disease model of addiction that says, well, it's kind of like like a virus or something. And people don't like to talk about it in terms of, hey, I have things that Jesus needs to work on, you know? But it's just the truth. I I don't think I've met two people that have been like, I just like it for the taste. I just like drinking a lot for the taste. And one of them came to me a couple weeks ago and said, "John, you're right. I found some stuff in my past that I realized that I'm medicating."
Yeah.
And again, it's not necessarily like he didn't find out like, oh my gosh, I was sexually abused, right? But he found, there's some things that were said to me that then created beliefs in me that
Hmm.
now as a
Yeah.
40-year-old man I'm running from. I hear at work that remind me of that wounded 10-year-old that heard those things from my mom, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to drink those away. Right. And I'm like, yeah, go back and heal what 10-year-old Johnny heard. Right.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
then the other person sober for 7 months. And I just really kept encouraging this person. Like, I just think you should go deeper. There's nothing there. I just like the taste and I'm good. I'm good. I stopped and I don't like it anymore. And, come to find out just a few weeks ago, he gets some really, really hard news in his life. And what does he do? He's been drinking ever since. And let me put it this way: if you just like the taste, when you get really bad news, you're not going to turn to something that you've sworn off for the rest of your life and have not been doing for 7 months. That's
Exactly.
indicative of something deeper.
Mhm.
So, that's what I encourage people is like, and I'm not out here saying no one can drink. I'm not out here saying that there's no healthy way to drink. I think if you can drink and put it in its proper place, all the power to you. That's
Right.
great.
Yeah.
I love that for you. My wife can. My wife, my wife can have we'll go out to dinner. My wife will have a drink, and I don't know, she'll not have another drink for 2 months. I have a drink at dinner, and I'm plotting, how can I get the next one? How can I be buzzed by the time we get home? How can I be buzzed enough to drive, but then in a good enough, place that then when I have two more at home while watching the football game to unwind, I'm feeling really great. And I'm forgetting about everything in the best way possible. So the only drink I can say no to is the first one.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I think where I am now. For me, it's been 33 years, and I don't want to test that theory.
Yes.
I'm good with I'm good with the only drink I can say no to is the first one, because I don't want to find out if that's true anymore. Like you said, this life is much better. It's not easy. And I think that's an important distinction. I think, people just make that assumption that, oh, I'm going to get clean and sober and my life is going to be roses and rainbows and
Yeah.
and it's not. It gets better, and you can find healthier, as you mentioned, healthier ways to cope, and then to go back and deal with those unhealed wounds. And your analogy of the building, as a builder and a remodeler, reminded me of the image of the church being more of a field hospital.
Mm,
And we everybody in the church is in need of healing for something.
yes.
None of us will be perfect this side of heaven. Jesus is the only one.
Yep. Yeah, I like to say, do you guys realize that God only worked through sinners? Like there was only one person he worked through that wasn't a sinner. His name's Jesus. Everyone else, they're all jacked up, right?
Hmm.
David, jacked up.
Oh, yes.
Abraham, jacked up, Noah, drunkenness, actually,
Hmm.
if we
Yeah.
want to talk
Yeah.
about that, they're all
Yes.
jacked up. And I think to your point too, the church does a horrible job of welcoming. I think they're better at welcoming people who were alcoholics that become Christians, but they're not good at welcoming the Christians that become
Mm.
alcoholics, or the Christians that become adulterers, or the Christians that become, the murderers or the rapists or the whatever, right?
Right.
And people are
Yes.
like, what do you, Bob goes out and murders someone and we have to, invite him back to church. Like, listen, Bob has to pay the consequences for his sin,
Hmm.
or his actions, right? But
Right.
there's grace available to Bob, just like there's grace available to you for, going on that profanity laced tirade against your kid, and you lost their temper, and you lost
Mm.
your temper. Like we are not good about understanding that we're all on a journey of sanctification. And for a lot of us, that journey is messy. It's messy
Yes.
sanctification. And I have a messy sanctification story, and we're all about come as you are, but the gospel is just as much about stay as you become, you know?
Mm.
And I think that's part of the message I'm hoping to bring to people is like, you've got some messy stuff in your life, whether you realize it or not. And some of us, our mess is a little bit more upfront, or it has more earthly consequences, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you're just as jacked up as me, right? I have this quote tattooed on my arm from the Desert Fathers. And the story goes, this one young monk comes to this older monk and is like, did you hear about Brother Lawrence, or, whoever, he got drunk last night, left the brotherhood, and he's back in the world. And the older monk goes to the younger monk, he today, I tomorrow. And it's the idea that we're all one stupid decision, one stupid night, one crazy thing away from being that guy. And the humility, or I pray for the humility to remember that on a daily basis, to the point where I got it tattooed on my arm.
And you know what? That is the perfect ending, I think, to this part of our conversation. And I do want to go to that question that you were
Yeah, and
anticipating.
I know we're a little long on time, so I'm sorry,
No,
but
no, it is quite all right. I think that the value of the story and the value of the message is invaluable. Let's put it that way. And so I do want to ask you. So maybe we have listeners. My audience is primarily female. At least that's what
I'm
my
used to that.
statistics.
I'm used to that.
That's what my statistics tell me. Um, and so, what would you say to the woman who's listening who, you know, doesn't have a deer camp or doesn't have a Miami Beach, but knows that there's something wrong, that maybe the Holy Spirit is just knocking on that door?
Yeah.
What would you say to her?
So two things. Is this where you want me to do the warrior words, or am I
Yeah, yes,
saving
yes.
that? Okay.
Preach it.
All right. So I thought we were going there, but I just wanted to make sure. But before I get to the exact warrior words, let me say this, is that, and you alluded to this earlier, you do not need a rock bottom moment to reevaluate your relationship with alcohol. Do many of us? Some of us? A lot of us? Yes. I if only I would have listened to that still small voice, if only I would have listened to that knocking at my heart months earlier, a year earlier, I could have saved myself. My wife and I just got done with a counseling. Like before I came on this, my wife and I were at a counseling appointment. Why? Because we're still working through some of the things that happened when, during my period of really what, like I call that severe slide, right? We're still working through that. I wish I would have listened to that voice a lot earlier. Don't wait until it gets to the point where you're drowning to ask for help, and you're going to save yourself a lot of heartache. And I guess you can say that segues a little bit into my warrior words. In the epilogue of the book, I tell the story of Gideon. And Gideon, so I'll back up and say there's 4 steps that I talk about in the book: abiding in Christ, finding your true identity, practicing radical vulnerability, and being obedient to God. Those 4 things, if you do them, you will find sobriety. Because you will find more of Jesus, right? And so I walk people through how to do that. And so I was reading the story of Gideon, and I was like, just taken aback. I was like, oh my gosh, Gideon did the 4 steps, right? And so, like, I trace through how Gideon did the 4 steps, but there's this section in the story of Gideon where Gideon feels, if you don't know the story of Gideon, he's like hiding out. He's hiding out farming, and because Israel's enemies are all around, and this angel comes to him and says, "Hey, I want you to lead the army and free the people." And he's like, "Are you kidding me?" He literally is like, "I'm the runt." He's like, "I'm the weakest guy in my tribe." And he's coming up with all these excuses why he can't. I can't do it because. I can't do it because. And Heather, there are so many times as the Holy Spirit is knocking on the door of my heart where I'm saying, I can't do it because. I can't do it because. I can't do it because. Or I'll do it when. I'll do it when. I'll do it when. And the angel looks at Gideon and he says these words. He says, "Go in the strength you have." Mm-hmm. And it's a reminder to Gideon, but it's a reminder to us that, like, God's gonna provide the strength, right? Like, whatever strength you have, go in that. I'll provide the rest. I'll provide the miracle. I'll provide the whatever, right? And so that's my encouragement. Like, if you are hearing that I need to reevaluate my relationship with alcohol, and I'll show you what that looks like in the book, right? You may feel so unequipped to do that. And I would say, go in the strength you have. Those words to Gideon are words that I think we need to embody in our own lives.
Amen to that. And the last thing I want to ask you is, how can people get the book?
Well, there you go.
And where
I
can
mean,
they find you to hear more about what you do? Because you mentioned your podcast and you have the book and then the other book that you mentioned. So
yeah.
give us all the details. How can we find you?
So the new book will be available next week, next Tuesday, October 7th. And it'll be available on all the platforms, the Amazon, the Barnes and Noble. But so you can go on Amazon right now. And my experience is that if you pre-order from Amazon, generally you get it, or even the publisher, you get it a little sooner than release day. I can't guarantee that, but it generally comes out. But if you want to get it from the publisher, if you want to get it from Amazon, if you want to check out my podcast, my previous book, you can go to christianalcoholic.com, and that kind of serves as a landing page for, if you pre-order now, you can still get it for 40% off plus free shipping from the publisher. So you can get it cheaper than you would on Amazon as long as it's before October 7th. And there's a link to that, but there's a link to the Amazon link as well. So christianalcoholic.com.
All right. And I'll make sure that link is in the show notes for everybody to just click on. And I want to thank you, Jon. A lot of times I will do stories and conversations with people, and I have nothing in common with their story. And I could just relate. That was kind of the point of my initial introduction is I could just relate so much to what you said. Our reasons for drinking were different, but it was just, your story is extremely relatable because so many of us have addictions to so many different things. And like you said, it doesn't have to be alcohol. It can be anything. And so I appreciate the time that you gave us, your radical vulnerability that you shared with us, and your lessons and your warrior words. Just so appreciative of you and your time.
Thanks, Heather. I appreciate it.
Thank you. That was a fantastic conversation. And to be honest, I had a hard time distilling it down to just one conclusion. So, as I do before recording this section of each episode, I prayed that the Holy Spirit would direct my words to be that which someone else needs to hear. And now I have more than one conclusion. So, the first thing that stood out to me in Jon's story was that of escapism. That is what ties his addiction to alcohol to everyone who hears this story. Like Jon, I agree that we all have our addictions. And to be honest, we're probably all using them to escape from something. And something we didn't actually discuss in this conversation, but he talks about it in the book. And that's the concept that anything that we put ahead of God is an idol and therefore sin. So whether it's alcohol, food, shopping, scrolling, or any number of other things, if it holds a place of higher importance than our relationship with God, it's sinful behavior. Now, I know sin is not a popular topic. We don't want to hear about it, and we don't want to be confronted with it because that makes us uncomfortable. But our addictions make us comfortable. And even when we have a relationship with Jesus, like Jon said, sometimes there are those uncomfortable parts of us that we try to hide from him. But the truth is, I think we're fooling ourselves if we think he doesn't already know about those secret passageways and cracks that we tried to cover up and to beautify. And I think we're good at beautifying things. We want to paint beautiful pictures. Churches full of nicely dressed people who know all the words and sing in perfect pitch. We even have actual paintings showing scenes from the Bible. And don't get me wrong, because there's nothing wrong with any of that. But as Jon pointed out, we tend to have a difficult time, or maybe a more difficult time, accepting when part of that pretty picture gets damaged. Maybe we look down our noses at those Christians, those perfectly polished church members who stray. Those church members who sin. One pretty picture comes to mind for me, and it's a beautiful image of our good shepherd, Jesus, triumphantly carrying a beautiful little lamb on his shoulders. It's a story I love, and it's Jesus leaving the 99 for the one who left the flock. Now think about that. That one was already part of the flock, which means that lamb was Christian before leaving. Jesus didn't give up on that one. He left the others and sought that one out. And that is not what a shepherd in that time would have done. But that's what Jesus did. What that beautiful painting doesn't show, though, is what that lamb was doing while apart from the flock. What messes he got himself into. How dirty he was when Jesus found him. Another thing that Jesus said, I don't remember, Pharisees, Sadducees, his critics, basically. He told them that the well have no need of a physician. And that's kind of what I meant about my field hospital comment in the episode. The church is a field hospital. And Jesus asks us to be his hands and feet. And like Gideon, you may not feel qualified to be the hands and feet of Jesus. But I encourage you, just like the verse from Judges 6:14 says, go with what strength you have and know that I have sent you. Now, since my conclusion was twofold, I'm going to give you some things to think about this week, and pick the one that applies best to you. So, if you feel like the Holy Spirit is knocking, that there's something indicating that you have a problem with addiction of any kind, not just alcohol, but any kind, even if you feel it's not that bad, talk to somebody about it and be radically vulnerable. And honestly, I do think this next one does apply to everyone. And that is to think about how you can be the hands and feet of Jesus in your church. There are people struggling, and they may just be sitting in the pew next to you. Until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words. God bless.